Hi, everybody, and welcome to our first hybrid event of the semester. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're coming from. I'm Laura Rosick. I direct the Center of Southeast Asian Studies here at the University of Michigan, and we are so happy to have you join us for today's lecture, Magnetic Female Power in East Javanese Cross-Gender Dance Performance. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for today's event, the University of Michigan International Institute, the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures, and the Department of Dance. And of course, we're always grateful to the Department of Education for providing funding to our National Resource Center Title VI grant, which funds this and many of our other activities. As a part of this lecture today, we really hope to welcome you tomorrow for our Gamelan Spring Recital. That is tomorrow at 2 p.m., an afternoon of Javanese music and mass dance. That's at the Hankinson Auditorium that is on, oh my gosh, I just had the name of the street in front of me, but on North, it's Bates, yeah, Bates. 1100 Bates Drive. But I plan to be there, and it is up on North Campus, and usually pre-pandemic, a tradition here at the University of Michigan to have a spring gamelan. Our next Friday seminar will be April 15th from 12 to 1 with Hugh Tom Jami from the Arizona State University. From informal to digital spaces, how to shape the lived experience of network transformation in Southeast Asia. And now I'm really happy to welcome our lecturer today, Professor Christina Sunardi. She is an associate professor in ethnomusicology program at the School of Music at the University of Washington, where she has been teaching since 2008. Her interests include performance, identity, spirituality, and ethnography in Indonesia. Her work focuses in particular on the articulation of gender through music, dance, and theater in the cultural region of East Java. And she was a really good sport and came to Michigan in April, and so traveled here, and we'll be participating tomorrow in the Gamelan, right? So we're really excited to have her here for both of these events. So Professor Sunardi, thank you so much.
Oh,
please.
Thank you. Yay, thank you. Thank you. Great, thank you. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. And it's so nice to see those of you who are in the room here and those who are on Zoom. Thank you so much for attending my talk. I'm really honored to come to this space and place, this land that I understand from the University of Michigan Museum of Anthropological Archaeology is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Wyandot, Seneca, Delaware, Javanese, Miami, Sauk, Fox, and others, and was granted to the University of Michigan in 1817 by the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe nations so that their children could be educated. I live in Seattle and work at the University of Washington on the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And I recognize the Duwamish as the first people of Seattle. I am grateful to the University of Michigan Center for Southeast Asian Studies for inviting me and organizing my visit. And I would like to thank in particular Steve Laronga, Christian Castro, and Jonathan Valdez. So simply put, I find the production, expression, and negotiation of gender through Indonesian performing arts to be fascinating. The person who initially inspired my interest in gender as an area of research is a Central Javanese dancer, Didi Nini Towok, who is pictured on the next slide. There we go. There's Didi Nini Towok. So Central Javanese dancer, identifies as a man, and again, specializes in female-style dance. I was captivated when I saw him perform the female-style dance, Beskalan Putri Malangan, which is an East Javanese dance, in San Francisco in 2003. And you can see him in a Beskalan Putri costume on the left side of the screen. The accompanying gamelan music, which was supplied by a recording, haunted me. And it was conversations with him about cross-gender dance performance and my obsession with this dance that led me to the incredible path that I have had the honor of taking in my own research and dance performance in Malang, which you can see where that is on the island of Java in Indonesia. And in Malang, it was not and continues to not be unusual for both males and females to perform East Javanese dances as cross-gender dances. I conducted my research in 2005 to 2007, and I've made several follow-up trips since then. Although I should mention that the last time that I was in Malang was 2015 or something like that. So it's been a little while since I've been there. Kind of keep up with what people are doing on social media. The dances at the center of my research included Beskalan, so you can see how it's spelled, Remo, and mass dances in female and male styles. So what does this mean by female and male styles? So male style dance, like Beskalan, Lanang, so Beskalan in the male style, it tends to have a wider stance and higher arm movements compared to female style dances like Beskalan Putri or Beskalan in the female style, which tend to have narrower stances and lower arm positions. This is kind of a simplification, but hopefully you can get the idea here. Now, most of the dances that I studied, most of the dances that I studied in Malang, or those that I observed, whether in a male or a female style, could be performed by males or females, although some dances were customarily performed as cross-gender dances. As I mentioned, I also studied mass dance, which I won't be talking about so much today, but just so you can, see a picture of some of the mass dances that I studied. There's some photographs there. Plug for the Gamelan concert tomorrow. I will be performing the mass dance with the white mask. It's called Gunung Sari, and Steve has been working really hard on the drumming, and we're looking forward to putting this together. And as perhaps could be sort of implied here, these dances that I was researching are accompanied by gamelan music. And so for those who are new to gamelan, it's a type of ensemble with metal keyed instruments and various types of gongs, including gongs that are played melodically. Although there's quite the legacy of gamelan scholarship and performance here, so perhaps you're well familiar with it. Let's see. Okay. In working to develop my understandings and ideas about gender in Indonesian performing arts, I've benefited from the rich studies conducted by my predecessors. And here I mention only a few. A number of scholars have centered women's roles as musicians and dancers, including Andy Sutton, Sarah Walton, Sarah Weiss, Andrew Weintraub, and Felicia Hughes Freeland. These scholars, among many others, have explored women's creativity, agency, aesthetics, and cultural politics. The ethnomusicologist Henry Spiller has drawn attention to the cultural constructions of maleness and masculinity through his analysis of masculinity in Sundanese dance performance. And Rasmussen foregrounds the Muslim context of Indonesia in her analysis of women's activities and agencies in Quranic recitation and Islamic music. These and many, many other studies have inspired my approaches to analyzing gender concepts, roles, relationships, and negotiations through East Javanese dance. Thanks to my predecessors, I have been inspired to explore the negotiation of gender through dance performance and its accompanying gamelan music, to situate senses of gender historically, and to relate these senses to cultural politics and the impact of the state, and to analyze both senses of masculinity and femininity. I'm also inspired by Judith Butler in that I approach sex and gender as unstable constructs that are continuously constituted by and through what people do, as well as through the ways people describe what they and others do or should do with their bodies. Bodies are sexed by people in terms of the biological sex that they ascribe to bodies, and gendered in terms of the behaviors and social roles that they ascribe to sexed bodies. The gendering of sexed bodies is a cultural process, shifting as individuals negotiate their identities in webs of local, national, and transnational ideologies. Thank you. Oh, did we lose? Maybe I was talking too long without changing the PowerPoint. Well, we'll come back. I can tell you about my book. I had a picture of my book cover on the slide, so it's not essential that you see that. It is the press did a really nice job with that cover, though. We'll acknowledge that. Yeah. Oh, there we are. There's the book cover. So in my book, I look at ways male and female performers have accessed and embodied femaleness through East Javanese presentational dance and its music in the 20th and 21st centuries, examining the perseverance of female power in the face of a variety of cultural pressures that work to contain, control, and suppress it. I show that the senses of gender that performers expressed with their bodies, however, included complex, multifarious senses of masculinity and femininity. Some of these senses included this concept of female masculinity that I have drawn from the gender scholar J. Halberstam. So this is a specific sense of masculinity that is produced, owned, and embodied by females. And another sense of gender that I explore is male femininity. And there I'm drawing from the work of Tom Belstorff. So male femininity is femininity that is expressed, embodied, and owned by males. Strikingly, I found that female masculinity and male femininity were not exactly analogous or parallel constructs because femininity or femaleness was at the heart of both. So here's some photographs. On the right-hand side is a female-bodied woman identifying dancer performing a male-style dance. And then on the left-hand side is an artist who was likely assigned male at birth performing a female-style dance. I believe this person identifies as Wadia in their offstage life, like when I've seen them out and about in the community, but I'm not 100% certain. That was somebody that I did not actually interview. One of my teachers articulated a sentiment that was consistent with what many other performers and audience members indicated to me in various ways. So the way he put it was that when he sees a woman performing male-style dance, her femaleness is still apparent, and he's drawn to her femininity. When he sees a man performing female-style dance, he's affected by the femininity of the dance and the dancer, not the dancer's maleness. This led me to question why the femaleness of cross-gender dances has such a strong impact. And I found one answer by exploring concepts of spiritual power in Java. Okay, one of the aims in my book is to contribute some new ways of thinking about spiritual power and the ways that it's manifested in Java. I found Benedict Anderson's discussion of spiritual power, or Kasekten, in his influential essay, The Idea of Power in Javanese Culture, very influential. And he describes Kasekten, or spiritual power, as that intangible, mysterious, and divine energy that animates the universe. And goes on to describe kind of what is it? How is it manifest? So he notes that spiritual power is able to be accumulated, and the more of this divine energy that a person or an object has, the more spiritually powerful, and literally like full of power, powerful a person or an object is. And this spiritual power can be acquired in a number of ways, such as through ascetic practices or through the possession of spiritually powerful objects. This power affects others in a number of ways, but seemingly without effort on the part of the spiritually potent person. There's this idea that others are drawn to spiritually powerful people as though magnetically attracted. Thanks to a number of scholars taking a feminist perspective, including Madeline Jojo de Ningrat Nieuwenhuis, Suzanne Brenner, Sarah Weiss, and Laurie Sears, I recognize that Anderson developed his analysis of power in Java based on the ways that males express and embody it. He, in effect, outlined a dominant, male-centered, and aristocratic ideology of spiritual power. Other analysts have enriched understandings of spiritual power in Java in different ways it is expressed, embodied, negotiated, and connected to social status by focusing on issues of gender and examining women's roles and experiences. Today, I highlight the work of Nancy Cooper. In her analysis of the power of women vocalists in Central Javanese Gamelan, she productively distinguishes the pure state of power, which may be accessed by females and males, and what she terms the gendered uses of power. She uses the term centripetality to specify a type of attracting power that she associates with women. And this contributed to my interest in the manifestation of spiritual power as it is gendered female. So using Anderson's and Cooper's metaphor of a magnet to describe the attracting force of spiritually powerful people, I write about spiritual power gendered female as the magnetic power of femaleness, or magnetic female power for short. I'm expanding Cooper's notion of centripetality, which she associates with women, to refer to spiritual power associated with femaleness more broadly. That is, femaleness connected to female bodies and or behavior or demeanor commonly accepted as feminine in Javanese society. Viewing the magnetic power of femaleness in this way facilitates my exploration of ways it has been accessed and embodied by women, men, and wadia. And wadia are males who dress and live as female. In some cases, I abbreviate my references to the magnetic power of femaleness to the power of femaleness or female power. I think I might have already mentioned that. There is a historical precedent for spiritual power gendered in Java. No, let me state that again. There is a historical precedent for spiritual power gendered female in Java in Shakti, which Judith Becker explains as a centuries-old Indic metaphor of female power. Shakti, as well as the importance of the unification of male and female forces, was an important component of tantric philosophy, which, imported from India, was known in Java in medieval times. And medieval times, in this regard, refers to the 8th to the 16th centuries. Drawing from both Judith Becker and Felicia Hughes Freeland, I have come to understand the modern Javanese concepts of Sakti and Kasakthian, or Kasakthan, I should say, and Sakti or Kasakthian in Indonesian as derived from the Indic concept, but no longer necessarily gendered female, at least in terms of common usage, how people use the terms now. However, Indic senses of Shakti as female energy and its importance to male potency do survive, as Judith Becker and Felicia Hughes Freeland have shown in their analyses of Central Javanese female-style court dance. My analysis in my book suggests that Indic senses of Shakti survive in East Javanese dance as well. So please allow me to provide a few examples of the expression of female power in Malang through the ways performers emphasize the femaleness at the heart of cross-gender dance performed both by females and by males. So now I think we get into kind of the more fun part of this presentation to look at some performances. So female dancers, as well as the mostly male musicians who accompanied them, were maintaining and making cultural space for the expression of women's magnetic power through women's performance of male-style dance. In performing male-style dance, females articulated female masculinity that entailed keeping their femaleness visible and audible. Building further from J. Halberstam, I view such approaches as forms of layering, a theatrical strategy in which a performed gendered role is noticeably superimposed, that is layered, onto an actor's own gendered self. One form of layering, Halberstam writes, occurs, quote, when a drag king performs as a recognizable male persona and chooses to allow her femaleness to peek through, unquote. Similarly, female dancers in Malang layered masculinity onto their female bodies when performing the recognizable male personas portrayed through female-style dance, allowing their femaleness to peek through a male veneer. They were thereby showing that women could be like men, be physically strong, take the lead, but without being men. In other words, women were insisting that their power they were insisting on their power as women, thereby maintaining the magnetic power of femaleness. Now the dance, Ngremo Tayub, oh, there's kind of a summary there. The dance Ngremo Tayub, and this, the model is in a costume for Ngremo Tayub. And here is a photo of Ngremo Tayub in performance. So this particular dance offers one of the most obvious examples of the ways women layered maleness onto their femaleness through movements and costuming, and also through music. So movements associated with masculinity, like higher arm positions, which you can kind of get a sense there. Also, wider leg stances and larger head movements included those drawn from various male-style dances and from a form of martial arts called pencak silat. However, females tended to articulate these movements in a more supple manner than males did for male-style dance, allowing a certain grace and fluidity that are associated with female-style dances and femaleness more broadly to permeate their execution of their movements. Other movements were associated more directly with femaleness, such as movements drawn from aerobics, which are typically a woman's activity, and from pat a cake can games, so movements associated with children's activities. Movements associated with femaleness juxtaposed with those associated with maleness, but executed in a more supple manner in the context of male-style dance performed by female bodies, produced a complex sense of gender indeed. When women perform male-style dance, in most cases, but not all, performers and audiences were aware that the dancers were female. For Gamelan Tayub, I should mention, is typically performed by women. So this is one of these cross-gender dances that is typically performed as a cross-gender dance. I didn't come across any instances of this dance being performed by a male-bodied person or a man-identifying person. So audiences were very much aware that the dancers were female. Also, they tend to change costumes and come back out dressed as women. So people knew that they were female. And at Gamelan Tayub and other performances where women were performing male-style dance, I didn't hear people trying to guess at the dancer's gender identity or wonder if the dancer was, a real man or not. Paradoxically, the awareness that the dancer was female reinforced the separation of maleness and femaleness, even as performers undermined conceptual and physical boundaries of gender through their production of female masculinity. For the most part, performing male-style dance did not detract from the performer's womanhood because usually the femaleness of the dancer's biological sex had a stronger impact on those watching than the maleness of the dance style, as I indicated earlier. Many females enhanced their womanly beauty while producing senses of masculinity through costuming and makeup. From Gamelan Tayub, the dancer and vocalist Karen Elizabeth Sekar Arum explained that the womanhood of the dancer is emphasized through the costume, jewelry, and makeup, despite the mustache that is penciled on and the maleness of the dance style. So as seen here in these photographs, the dancer Sri Handayani on the left doesn't look like a man, at least to me. She doesn't look like a man. She looks like a woman who's trying to sort of look like a man. And we can compare this to a male dancer performing Remo in the male style called Remo Lanang. And so some things to notice is that Sri's costumes has the bare shoulders. So she's got a strapless top and a vest that show her shoulders and her arms, in contrast to the male dancer who has on a long sleeve shirt. Also, Sri's kind of female figure is enhanced through the way that she has fastened the top. She very likely has a corset on underneath it, so to really show off her curves. Her bare arms are also, they also reinforce her womanliness and are rather erotic in a Muslim context in which many women do cover their shoulders and the top parts of their arms, if not all of their arms in public. She has on a wig of short hair and a male-style headcloth. She's also used cosmetics to make her femaleness apparent. So it might be hard to tell in this photo, but she has false eyelashes on, and the pink and purple colors of the eyeshadow and the shape of the eyebrows, the soft application of the blush. These are all recognizably feminine according to conventions of East Javanese dance makeup. And you can compare that again to the male dancer who does not have on false eyelashes. You can see the very dark eyeshadow that he's using, the very thick eyebrows that he's drawn, and the thick sideburns, and the very strong application of blush. Right, it's quite dark. So kind of a different impact there. Female singers negotiated sonic boundaries of gender through musical conventions, including conventions of singing for the dance Remo. And I should mention that part of performing Remo Doesn't always have to be this case, but very often singing is part of it. The dancer sings welcoming text and this little poetic text as well. And so when women are singing for Ngremo Tayub, the femaleness of their voices makes it obvious that they're female. So this further complicates the maleness of the dance. And I hear this as their female voices layered their femaleness over the male style dance. I also want to acknowledge that male musicians, as well as female dancers, were agents in the production of female masculinity and contributed to the process of sonic layering. So for example, musicians contributed to the production of female masculinity through their drumming. Dennis Suwarno, who was a drummer, said that the character and feeling of Ngremo Tayub was still coquettish, even though women were wearing a male-style costume. And for this reason, he explained, he played the drum coquettishly by intentionally making strokes sound higher and lighter and by playing relatively sparsely, which I found fascinating. I do have a video example to show, which I hope you enjoy watching, so that we can kind of see these combinations of maleness and femaleness and how this layering sort of works. So in this video example, which I took in like 2005 or 2006, note the movements are associated with male style dance. So like the larger, kind of arm movements, the wider stance. You'll see some kicks too. I'm not sure exactly where those were inspired from, but kind of some high kicks there. People talked about the influence of like kung fu and sport, like soccer as well in this. So maybe that's where that's coming from. Notice the mustaches that they have on and other aspects of their cosmetics, kind of like what I was talking about before. And then also too, of course, hear the music. And the piece that's being played, performers did tell me was appropriate for male style dance. It has kind of a gaga, kind of a strong male kind of feel to it. As far as articulations of femaleness, notice that when they come onto the stage, they're wearing sandals, like very feminine. Sandals that are read as being feminine in Java and maybe other, I'm thinking a lot of places too. Some of them are high-heeled, for example. Notice the way that their hourglass figures are enhanced to their costumes. Notice their eyeshadow, again, back to the cosmetics. And then the articulation of the movements, too. Just note that there's a certain grace and fluidity to their movements. Even though they're using large movements, again, there's kind of a feminine grace that they are putting into that. And then notice the sound of their voices, too, are audibly women's voices. Okay. I got to be sure to use the mouse. All right. Okay, so just a little clip there, and there's so much more that could be said about that, but in terms of time, I do want to also talk about male dancers performing female style dance. Okay, turning to male dancers. So male dancers who performed female style dance expressed, embodied, and represented male femininity in diverse ways. They have thereby been contributing to the ongoing cultural production of tradition and maintaining cultural space for males to access and make visible the magnetic power of femaleness. Focusing on Ludruk theater performances that I observed in Malang, and Ludruk is a type of East Javanese theater, I saw that the male artists who specialized in female roles called tandak Ludruk, worked quite hard to look feminine. And in Malang, the performance of Ludruk tended to feature mostly all male casts. I recognize that this is not the same throughout East Java, but in Malang, well, I have to say, during the time of my field work, the casts were mostly all male. Now, some of the artists who performed as Tandak Ludruk lived as men in their daily lives, while others lived as waria, again, males who dress and live as female. Most wore figure-enhancing undergarments, such as corsets. Some wore spandex or spandex-like shorts that gave their bottoms a shapelier, more feminine silhouette. Some males had full breasts, perhaps from hormone therapy or silicone injections, indicating that they had more permanently altered the appearance of their bodies. Most spent a considerable amount of time doing their makeup, expertly softening and smoothing their complexions through foundation and powder, enhancing their eyes with layers of eyeshadow and eyeliner, false eyelashes, and highlighting the bone structures of their faces with blush and defining their lips with lipstick. To sound feminine, male tandak cultivated the falsetto ranges of their voice in order to sing in the same high register as females. For the dance Gremo Putri, here we are, Gremo in the female style, they also sang melodies that exploited higher pitches and used vocal ornamentation to make the lines sound more feminine. Performers and audiences valued male tandak's ability to look like women and not like males trying to look like women, pointing to their expectations that tandak pass or virtually pass. One artist and I, one time, we watched footage from a Ludruk performance that I had videotaped together, and he remarked that I remarked that the tandak were very coquettish. He replied that the tandak used to be too coquettish, and so they looked like cross-dressers. And the director then told them to kind of tone it down a little bit, and now they were good. They were more realistic. Musicians reported that although they know that most tandak Ludruk are male, the way that they play and feel can be affected by tandak who are particularly believable as women. The drummer and my principal gamelan teacher, Sunardi, explained that because tandak Ludruk can embody the soul of a woman and are coquettish, he does not feel like he's drumming for a man. Expecting and allowing themselves to be fooled or convinced, many audience members were taken in by a tandak's feminine beauty, allowing themselves to be fooled or quote-unquote fooled by relishing their own confusion. I frequently overheard men and women of all ages make comments about tandak, such as, is that really a woman? Or that one looks like a real woman. So there was kind of a different expectation of male-bodied performers performing female-style dance than there was for female-bodied performers performing male-style dance. So I wanted to show a video of this too. And one thing I also wanted to highlight was that the performers that were actively performing at the time of my field work were performing femininity in ways that kind of annoyed my teachers. They were not annoyed by male-bodied people performing female-style dance. So like that's part of this dance, it's part of that tradition. But they were bothered that the femaleness they thought was straying too far from the sort of polite senses of femaleness that they thought should be at the heart of this dance. In fact, one of my teachers stopped coming with me to performances because he was just getting too bothered. But then I started thinking about this, from the other end, thinking about, well, how are they changing the tradition? How are they taking femaleness and femininity into some new directions through their performances that are meaningful to them? And so some things to notice in this particular clip are the movements. We'll be seeing movements that are drawn more from popular forms than from the forms of the traditional Ngremo dance. What has happened is, like, the first part of the Ngremo will be performed, and then there's kind of an insertion of like popular music and movement, and then it kind of goes back to the more traditional movement. So we're kind of in the part where there's movements that have come in that have been inspired by popular forms like Champersari and Dangdut. And notice sometimes the performers show their teeth, either when they're smiling or singing along to the music, which really bothered my teachers because they felt that traditional female-style dance should be a smile without showing the teeth. That was what would show proper kind of womanhood, according to them. So the teeth really bothered them. And then the music we'll hear too is, we'll hear some influence from some modern forms as well. Well, Champersari and Dangdut. You might be able to hear kind of like the keyboard in the background and like electric bass. Okay, so it's a pretty fun video. You can see how much fun the performers are having on the stage. And then you'll notice too the singer sounds very feminine. Let's advance. There we are. Okay. Oh, and also the way they have their sampur kind of wrapped around their bodies, sort of like show off a feminine figure. It does display a womanliness, but also for my teachers, they found that not appropriate. It also shows their backs too, which my teachers found kind of just not appropriate for this particular dance. Okay. Okay, so that's the end of that clip, but hopefully you can get a sense of the performer's work to look as feminine as possible, but at the same time they were taking tradition into some new directions that were kind of controversial within the Gamelan community that I worked with. And something that I forgot to mention before the video played is the song that they're singing is Bokong Si Mo, which means sexy butt. So that's why there was some butt movements going on there. So really popular song at the time that I was in Malang. So some male dancers attributed their abilities to perform convincingly as women to their abilities to locate and draw on their feminine qualities. That is, the male femininity they identified and thus expected in their own selves. For example, Kadam said that he naturally has a high voice, so he's suitable for female roles. Generalizing that male Tandak's ability to perform female roles stemmed from their own feminine attributes, he explained that most males who perform female roles are able to do so because they have women's blood or women's hearts. And this kind of man can be satisfied by dressing as a woman. Some Tandak reinforce their female roles on stage and their feminine tendencies in general by referring to themselves and other male Tandak as Saniwati, which is the feminine form of the word Saniman, or artist. So this is analogous to a man referring to himself as an actress rather than an actor. And in this manner, they link their temporary transformations to womanhood to their gendered identities as professional performers. Or I should say, rather, professional gendered performers. Okay, so to summarize, kind of think about some questions. What are the larger implications of femaleness that underlies most of the cross-gender dance performances I observed? In my book, I explore in more detail the different manifestations of female power in Javanese history and society, from sexual power to martial power to economic power, and various social pressures, particularly since the Declaration of Independence, that have attempted to control and contain female power by separating maleness from femaleness, mapping femininity to female bodies and masculinity to male bodies, and privileging heterosexuality. This has, in some cases, happened violently, as in the sexual violence experienced by women during the 1965-66 sort of purge of communists and its aftermath. And this has also affected the arts, as seen in various New Order, which was an authoritarian regime that ruled for like 32 years. New Order efforts to upgrade and develop particular traditions. I contend in my book that in accessing and embodying female power, the male and female performers I consulted in Malang were maintaining cultural and social space for female power despite these and other pressures. In so doing, they simultaneously synthesized, contested, redefined, and experienced a range of gendered identities, actively affecting and disrupting pre-existing conventions of performance, notions of tradition, and assumptions about male and female. Okay, thank you. That's what I have. Thank you. Well, you know, it's funny. I actually have a lot more, but I realized that we only have an hour together. So.
Thank you so much for the great talk and the videos. So if you have questions online, please feel free to submit them in the chat. And if anybody here has any questions, I have a microphone just to facilitate our... Oh. I have a microphone right here to facilitate the questions. Are there any questions in the room?
I should get a pen.
Well, thank you very much, Christina. This was so fun.
Oh, thank
and
you.
so nostalgic, because
Oh.
I lived in Malang in the 60s and so well remember this tradition.
Oh, cool.
And at the time, the government had turned to the right and was beginning to be oppressive to these cross-gendered performances. And, you know, they wanted men to be men and women to be women. And I kind of thought maybe this is going to be the end of Remo. Well, clearly it is not.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was, I guess my, first of all, they're as outrageous as they always were, which was delightful to see. But I was wondering about the government's attitude, because at the time, in the 60s, I thought this isn't going to last. The government is coming down hard on these folks.
Yeah.
But clearly I was wrong. And what's the government attitude now, and what effect does it have?
Yeah, there's such great questions. When you were there in the 60s, I'm curious, was it before like 65, 66, or was it like after that?
It was just before.
Just before. Yeah, so something that I look at in more detail in my book is how, I guess what I found was like really going back to like the independence movement, so like to the 1940s, where femaleness was kind of mapped to women's bodies, and maleness was mapped to men's bodies, and there was sort of a kind of a less, like coming from the government anyway, kind of this idea of like, what am I trying to say? Like really standard, like really linking gender to biological sex is something that I see going back to the 1940s, whereas prior to the 1940s, there seemed to be a little bit more fluidity and understanding around that. And it seems to be around the time that independence was declared and kind of the Indonesian Revolution, where these things kind of became separated. And then under the era of Sukarno, became sort of further separated. And I mean, I found this interesting because I initially thought it was all the New Order. I was like, oh, it's the New Order. It was so oppressive and like very controlling, and there's this idea about women need to be wives and mothers, and men are the heads of the household, and kind of run the state. Despite in traditional Javanese culture, women managing like household finances, and playing really important economic roles in the market, working outside of the home. So I thought it was this, like a new order thing. So I was really surprised to find that, like, well, actually no, in the old order, like it already was kind of being separated out. And I'm thinking particularly of the work of James Peacock. He was in Surabaya and found that really starting in like the 1940s, the Tandak Ludruk, who had been living off stage kind of more feminine. They weren't using the term wadia at the time, but they talked about how they had long hair, and they worked as like seamstresses and things like that, how they were forced to cut their hair and wear it short as this sort of way of embodying the sort of new Indonesian male identity, and how that was really traumatic for them to cut their hair, because that long hair was a way that they were showing their commitment to womanhood on and off the stage. So it's interesting to think about your experience in Malang, how you were seeing the government kind of trying to make these separations before the new order came into power. There's so much. There's a lot here. Performers talk to me about women taking more female roles in Ludruk, in particular in the 1970s. Like that's what they remember. But they talked, and some of the women that I interviewed performed in Ludruk. So they performed Grandma Putri in Ludruk, and they performed some of the female roles. But they said in Malang, like males still continued to perform female roles, but they were expected to be men in their daily lives. And they said it was a little different in places like Surabaya and Mojokerto, where like even nowadays, or I should say at the time of my fieldwork, most of the female roles were played by women. So Malang seemed to maintain this older practice. But in talking with, this doesn't really answer your question about the government, but performers, most of the ones that I worked with still had the assumption, or they still had these ideas that even the people performing the Tandak Ludruk part should be men in their offstage life. Like they were not entirely comfortable with wadia. And they would say really demeaning things about wadia, like, wadia are ruining Ludruk. Or I don't want to play for Ludruk anymore because or I don't want to dance in Ludruk because there's too many wadia, and like they make me uncomfortable. I mean, they said worse things. But they were not comfortable with wadia, and so very much got this sense that there was this expectation that like male-bodied people should live as men. So still kind of, how to say it, espousing the sort of, well, they grew up during the New Order era, so kind of espousing that. Some of them were born during the Old Order as well. As far as the government attitudes, as far as things like, I'm thinking about like, competitions that have, I don't know if they're necessarily sponsored by the government, like the ones that I went to. I got this sense when I was there that there was a really strong emphasis on preserving East Javanese tradition and East Javanese culture, like really like working to maintain it. And a lot of the musicians that I was working with were also really strongly subscribed to that. There was also this lingering, I think, New Order kind of like ideology of developing the arts and like refining them, and there's kind of an influence of Central Javanese culture there too. Like, well, what does it look like to refine East Javanese arts, kind of make them look more like the court styles a little bit? So there was kind of that going on, but at the same time wanting to maintain East Javanese arts. And so if there was a tradition of performing dances as cross-gender dance, like in Ludruk, it seemed like that was okay. But again, the cross-genderness of it should stay on the stage, was the sort of sense that I got. But Wadia also, the Wadia performers that I did talk to, they also spoke to like the 1970s as being a time when they felt they could be more free to like live and dress openly as Wadia. And Wadia as a word, it was created in the late 1970s by the government as a culturally sensitive way to refer to people who identify that way. So there's, I don't know, there's kind of a lot going on. I don't know if I'm totally answering your question, other than just.
You're kind of saying that it's ambiguous today as it was 30 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
The government's attitude toward these cross-gendered performers and performances. Yeah.
Well, and like when I'm with Tayub, I'm thinking about being performed specifically in the context of Tayub, where there has been a lot of government influence in terms of like kind of cleaning it up. And the performers talked about, especially since the 1980s, anyway, is what performers talked about, you know, making sure that it was polite, and like when guests were requesting songs, they weren't putting money like in the dancers' like bras and things. It was much more polite handover of money. And they talked about that starting they said since the 80s or so. But there was this sort of consciousness about it being more polite now than it used to be. They talked about, oh, there used to be all these fights, the guests would be grabbing the women and acting kind of inappropriately. I mean, I don't want to say that fights never break out anymore, but this is like kind of what they talked about. And a lot of the women that I spoke to talked about, I mean, they really sort of emphasized like their propriety as female performers, like this is our art, and we do like this is polite, this is our work. So they were talking about it very much in terms of being artists, and that the cross-gender performance aspect of it was part of the art form. So they to me, they made that really clear, and it wasn't necessarily like I identify as like, well, I guess I'm thinking of Evelyn Blackwood's work on like tomboys in West Sumatra. So they weren't trying to pass as men in their offstage lives. They still very much identified as women. So I'm kind of thinking that in some ways it was acceptable then for them to perform maleness on stage. I didn't encounter any women who lived as men in their offstage lives. There was a lesbian couple who lived up the street from where I was staying, and you know, nobody said anything really terrible about them, but they were living as women. But from Evelyn Blackwood's work, it seems that tomboys do have kind of a rough time, and they're not totally visible, much less visible than like Wadia, for example. So there does seem to be still just a lot of ambiguity around it. Oh, sorry, I've probably been going on for too long. If there's other questions. Oh.
Oh, yeah, you have a question that's a little bit on this. This is from Bob. There we go. This is from Bob Hefner.
Oh.
It sounds like you know him.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes.
And he thanks you for a great presentation, as does everybody other giving the other questions. He too lived in rural Malang long ago for dissertation research in the late 1970s as a postdoc research in 1985. Since he lived in rural Malang, Tumpang Bukakala, am I saying that right? I came to dance in perhaps 40 Tayub events. It was an amazing experience, and you have captured it brilliantly in your work. When I revisited the region in the late 1990s, it seemed to me that the twin influences of growing Islamic reform and government restriction were leading to a pronounced decline in Tayub events. I was thus surprised and delighted to learn from your work that Tayuban and Ludruk are still alive and well in Malang. Can you surmise whether a revival has occurred with decentralization or whether some regions' conservative term has led to Tayubun's decline? Thanks again for a great presentation.
Yeah, that is such a great question. I have not thought through the implications in terms of decentralization. Something that I do need to think more about is to what extent have these traditions just sort of continued, since, well, let's say the 60s, I guess. I'm thinking of the 60s particularly because of 1965, 66, and that was such a traumatic time, and it affected the arts like so profoundly, and so many artists were either killed or decided that they didn't want to go back to performing. So I see this as kind of a transitional moment. And so to what extent, I also think about the impact of that on performances that came after, where artists were like, we better play it safe, and we better adhere to what the government is telling us about how the art should be and about how gender should be, because there was this very real possibility of bodily harm or disappearing, or they had lost people they knew and loved and things like that. So I wonder about that. And at the same time, the New Order's emphasis on developing regional traditions and sort of like putting them on display at places like Taman Mini and stuff like that. And so to what extent were artists working in the regions given support to develop regional arts, but to make them more polite, or quote unquote polite. And again, I feel like this is tied up so much with Central Javanese court aesthetics, and so making them more. I'm thinking of Felicia Hughes' freelance work as well here too. Sort of like, what does she talk about? This concept of Adi Luhung, and like trying to make the regional styles fit that as being kind of part of the New Order's effort to control everything, really. And I'm thinking of some traditions like Reog Ponorogo, right, with the big masks. I mean, it's amazing that are held in the mouth. And the men who wielded these masks, called warok, they sort of traditionally had relationships with boys called gemblak who would dress as girls and live with them and like do their housework and stuff like that. And it was a means really of preserving spiritual potency. So rather than having wives or women that they would like have sex with and therefore lose their spiritual potency, they would live with gemblak who would help like play the roles of wives, but ostensibly wouldn't be sexual partners, although it seems like some perhaps did have sexual relationships. But speaking to this idea of the impact of Islam, for some Muslims and for the government, they saw this as inappropriate during the New Order era, and so they like quote unquote upgraded Reog Ponorogo so that the parts that were performed by the boys as gemblak are performed by girls now. So there's these kinds of shifts that are like definitely wrapped up with the government and also wrapped up with some ideas of sort of Islamic orthodoxy. Although I will say that I think there was only one performer that I worked with that identified as Catholic. Everybody else was Muslim. And so there's a lot of Muslims who are devout Muslims who are very committed to cross-gender dance performance. I think because it is part of local tradition, and they're so committed to maintaining East Javanese dance. So what I don't know is that in this sort of post-authoritarian time, if the emphasis on the regional arts is something that's like new and is new because there was an emphasis on regional arts during the New Order era in terms of developing them. It seems like there's a continuation into post-authoritarian times of doing that. And I think it might be related to the fact that a lot of the musicians and dancers that I was working with who were sort of like in charge of things grew up during the New Order era. So they grew up with those discourses and that attitude. And so they continued them into post-authoritarian times. But it is something I am just starting to think about in terms of like with the decentralization that we've been seeing since the fall of the Suharto regime. Like, what impact does that have on the ways that regional arts are portrayed? Yeah, again, sorry, I feel like this is kind of a long answer that I'm not really answering, but hopefully these are some thoughts that have been swirling. And maybe those of you who are here, maybe you already know Robert Hefner's work, but amazing work. I've been so inspired by your work on Tayub in East Java and thinking about Islam and the Islamization of Javanese culture, especially since, well, and that's another really interesting topic, you know, because we can think about, you know, the sort of increasing Islamicization that we've seen since the 1970s, but we can also go back much further too in the past and think about how Islam has been, you know, such an important part of Javanese culture for, you know, for hundreds of years, and how do we see that manifested in different ways in different time periods? So, subject maybe for another day. Yeah, is there another question?
So you have another couple questions. Are you okay with taking another few questions?
Yeah,
It's going a little late.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Henry Spiller says hi.
Oh my gosh.
I know, it's always fun to like see these people pop into your talks, I'm sure. Is this degree of gender fluidity in dance unique to Malang or East Java, or do you think it's typical of other parts of Java as well? Can you compare the gender fluid performances in Central and or West Java? I think you just touched on this a little, but.
Yeah, that is such a good question too. I mean, I do see this in other regions of Java. So one of the examples I think that arises is women, well, so in theater, how to say it, dance dramas, so Wayang Wong is what I'm thinking of. So like dance dramas, there's a kind of a spectrum of male characters from like super refined to, you know, really coarse. And it's not unusual to have women perform the refined male characters, like Arjuna or, you know, something like that. So that happens in Central Java. There is Didik Nini Towok, who has made his career performing female-style dance. However, with Didik Nini Towok, something I think that drew me to him, and something that I got from talking with him, was that, I mean, he really made it his mission to show the history of cross-gender dance performance in Javanese dance, including in the courts. And I don't have my notes right in front of me, so I might get these centuries off, but like I want to say like 18th, 19th century court dance, like Bedoyo, there were traditions of men performing the female style court tradition. So I mean, so that's happened. Sumarsam writes about in the courts historically this the Sultan's female bodyguards. So there are these like really interesting, I think, histories of sort of either cross-genderness or women taking on what we might think of as a sort of maleness, although perhaps at the time, like a female bodyguard was not necessarily considered masculine. It just was female soldiers. So you do find that in West Javanese dance. Henry, you would really be the expert on this, but what I understand from your work is that too, there's you know, kind of a history of, or tradition of women performing male roles also, like including in masked traditions, but please correct me there. I will say that something that I noticed in East Java is that, so I guess I have to back up and say, like, I was very often mistaken for being a Wadia in Central and in East Java, because I'm really tall, like a lot taller than like most Javanese women and like most Javanese men, actually. So I'm tall and I have kind of broad shoulders and stuff, and so people just assumed that I was a man, but they saw that I was feminine, so they're like, okay, she must be a Wadia. And in East Java, I noticed a lot more interest in Wadia from men. Like they were like people like propositioned me thinking that I was a Wadia. And when they found out that I wasn't a Wadia, they were no longer interested. They were like, oh, sorry. And like, and that happened to me more in East Java than in Central Java. And I felt like I joked with somebody about this, saying like, oh, people really like Wadia here. Even if it's not like part of the dominant discourse, there's a lot of men who are like really into Wadia. And someone said, yeah, that is there. And I didn't experience that in Central Java. And I don't know why, if it's that people are more into Wadia in East Java, or if there's more foreigners in Central Java, and so people were used to seeing tall, broad-shouldered women, and so it wasn't so unusual. So I don't know about that, but I found it really striking in East Java, just like how much interest there was in Wadia, and I felt like I saw more Wadia out and about in Malang. And the other thing too is that I also want to be careful about generalizing about East Java, because I really spent the bulk of my time in Malang. I mean, I visited Surabaya a couple of times, but my understanding is that like the regions are quite different, and there's like different subcultures within the region. So I feel like I can really only talk about like where I was in Malang. Okay.
Okay, we have one more question from Christy Ann Castro, and she said she could talk to you about a dinner, but this is the question I would ask too. So I think this would be a great one to end on. So Christy Ann says, wonderful to have you here. Thank you. Could you talk more about how women are encouraged not to transgress on manhood by retaining markers of femininity, while men are encouraged to be as feminine as possible in their dance performances? This goes along with the thesis about the power of femininity, but it also supports ideas that manhood is inaccessible, a protected identity space, but womanhood is available, with femininity as a resource, for instance. Yeah, I thought that was a great question to end on.
Yeah, that is a really, let me think about this for a minute, because I guess I'm, on the one hand, yes, thinking about like manhood as a protected thing that can only be accessed by, like truly accessed by men. I guess I'm more inclined to see it more in terms of the power of femaleness and femininity, and like the necessity of femaleness in Javanese culture. So I guess I see it more in terms of like the power of femaleness and femininity, rather than like women can't be men. I know that's not quite what you're saying or quite what you're asking, but I guess I see it in terms of just this really fundamental, important strength of femininity that is so necessary in Javanese culture, and it's manifested in different ways, including like oppression of women too, because I think on some level, I mean, maybe this gets a little too like psychological, or, I don't have support to really defend this, but this idea that like on some level men are intimidated by women's power and therefore feel like they really need to control it, in part because women's power is so important in the society. It's connected with, like with fertility and with rights and economics and things like that. And a woman's sexual power is also, can be seen, at least the way it's performed in the arts, as something that is, really tests men's limits. You know, like, can they resist it and thereby show this is building from Nancy Cooper and from Henry Spiller too. Like, can they resist it and thereby show their own power? Or do they like kind of cave into it and show their sort of base carnal desires and lack of control that is sort of the default of being a man in some ways. So I guess I kind of see it more, like I said, kind of more like in the power of femininity. And that in these performances, women, like, they're not trying to pass as men. You know, they're trying to show that like women can be strong and take on leadership roles like men, but they want to do so as women. They still want people to see that they are women and they're able to be strong. I don't know if this is kind of answering. It's like, yeah. Okay. Yes.
Thank you so much for
Oh,
coming,
thank
and
you.
thank you everybody for attending. Oh, you can't hear this. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for coming to Michigan. We're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. And thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you at the Gamelan tomorrow at 2 o'clock in Hankinson Hall. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you.